This video is for The Living Earth, Unit 4.4, Genetic Disorders and Technology. Today's essential question is, what are the causes and symptoms of various genetic disorders? Today, we are going to explore a really fascinating and important topic in biology, genetic disorders. These are conditions that happen when there are changes or mutations in our DNA, the molecule that carries the instructions for building and running our bodies. Some mutations are small, affecting just a single gene, while others are large, involving entire chromosomes or big sections of DNA. These changes can cause a wide variety of health problems, or sometimes surprisingly, no problem at all. Our goal today is to understand how these mutations happen and what kinds of symptoms they cause, and how doctors and scientists diagnose and sometimes even treat these disorders. So as we go, I want you to think about this. How does a tiny change in DNA lead to such big effects in the body? Can we always predict the outcome of a mutation? And what role does the environment play in all of this? Let's start by looking at a small-scale mutation. Imagine you're copying a receipt word for word, or a recipe word for word, but you accidentally type a wrong letter or leave out an ingredient in that recipe. That's what happens when DNA replication, remember, which is the process where our cells copy DNA. Normally, the enzyme that we have already studied, DNA polymerase, works like a careful editor, matching up the correct letters or nucleotides in the DNA. But sometimes mistakes happen. A wrong nucleotide gets added, or an extra one slips in, or maybe one is left out. These mistakes can cause point mutations, like swapping out one letter in a word. A substitution, or adding/removing letters, should be an insertion or deletion. If these mistakes aren't caught by the cell's proofreading tools, they can change how a protein is made. Some changes to these proteins have no effect at all, and these are called silent mutations. But others can make a protein that doesn't work right, or even one that's harmful. Mutations can also happen from outside influences, like UV radiation from the sun, chemicals in cigarette smoke, or pollutants in the environment. These factors can damage DNA and make mutations more likely. So remember, mutations can be random, which we call spontaneous mutations, or caused by environmental factors. These effects can range, again, from harmless all the way to very serious. Now let's look at specific single gene disorders. These are diseases caused by a mutation in just one gene. Even though it's a small change, the effects can be life-changing. For example, cystic fibrosis happens when a gene for a chloride channel protein is defective. Imagine a gate in a fence that's stuck shut. Chloride ions can't move in and out of the cell properly. This leads to a thick, sticky mucus that clogs the lungs, pancreas, and other organs. People with cystic fibrosis often struggle to breathe, get frequent lung infections, and have trouble absorbing nutrients. Sickle cell anemia is caused by a mutation in the gene for hemoglobin, which is the protein in red blood cells that carries oxygen. When oxygen levels are low, the mutated hemoglobin makes the red blood cells stiff and crescent shaped. These misshapen cells can block blood flow, causing pain and organ damage. Interestingly, people who carry one sickle cell gene, called the heterozygous condition or heterozygous carriers, are less likely to get malaria. And this is a good example of how some mutations can have both positive and negative effects, depending on the situation. Huntington's disease is different. It is caused by too many repeats of the letters C, A, G in the Huntington gene. This leads to a faulty protein that causes nerve cells in the brain to die. Symptoms like memory loss, mood changes, and trouble moving usually start in a person's 30s or 40s. And sadly, the disease gets worse over time. PKU, or phenylketonuria, is another example. People with PKU can't break down an amino acid called phenylalanine. If untreated, it builds up and damages the brain. But if it's caught early through newborn screening and managed within a special low phenylalanine diet, children with PKU can live healthy lives. So, a single change in one gene can have a big effect, but knowledge and treatment can make a difference. Now let's shift gears to large-scale mutations. These are big changes in the chromosome, like whole pages of a recipe getting duplicated or deleted or even rearranged. One major cause is non-disjunction. When chromosomes don't separate properly during the process of meiosis, the process that makes eggs and sperm, this can lead to too many or too few chromosomes. For example, Down syndrome happens when there's an extra copy of chromosome 21. So instead of 2, the person has 3 copies. This is called trisomy 21. People with Down syndrome may have intellectual disabilities, distinct facial features, heart defects, and a higher risk of certain health problems like early onset Alzheimer's. Turner syndrome affects females who are missing all or part of one X chromosome. They may have a shorter height, a webbed neck. They may be infertile because their ovaries don't develop fully. There's also Klinefelter syndrome, which happens in males who have an extra X chromosome. So they have the XXY condition instead of the XY. These individuals may have a taller height, less body hair, lower testosterone levels, and may have some learning differences. Remember, large-scale mutations affect many genes all at once, so they often cause more severe problems than single gene mutations. Now let's talk about multifactor disorders. These are conditions that don't have just a single cause, like a faulty single gene. Instead, they have many different genes and many different environmental factors interacting. Think of it like a recipe with many ingredients. Each gene and each lifestyle factor adds something to the final outcome. For example, Alzheimer's disease is linked to certain genes, but also to risk factors like head injuries, high blood pressure, and aging. Similarly, cancers like breast or colon cancer can run in families, but exposures to things like radiation, chemicals, or smoking can increase the risk even more. Heart disease and type 2 diabetes work the same way. Your genes might make you more likely to develop these conditions, but choices like eating a healthy diet, exercising, avoiding toxins, and getting regular checkups can help reduce the risk. This is why it's so important to focus on prevention. We can't change our genes, but we can make choices that help us stay healthy. Lastly, let's talk about how technology helps us understand and manage genetic disorders. Scientists use tools like karyotyping to look at chromosomes under a microscope and spot large-scale mutations like trisomy 21. They use DNA sequencing to read the genetic code, like proofreading a recipe letter by letter. There's also gene therapy, which is an exciting new field where scientists try to correct faulty genes, almost like fixing a broken instruction in a blueprint. It's still experimental for most diseases, but it does have the potential to treat or even cure certain genetic disorders in the future. Remember, our understanding of genetic disorders is always evolving. The more we learn, the better we can help those affected. and maybe even prevent some of those conditions from happening in the first place. At this point, you should be able to generate a full and appropriate response to today's essential question. What are the causes and symptoms of various genetic disorders?